You are listening to the Fireside Chat podcast with John Hall, brought to you by Beef and Lamb SA.
Next to me is someone that works with arguably one of the most critical topics in our industry, sustainability. So, Enrike, welcome. You're quite a force to be reckoned with. So, I'm just going to grab my notes because it's quite an impressive list. So, I'm going to run through this. Here we go. First and foremost, you're a knowledgeable animal scientist, international researcher in the fields of sustainability within the livestock industry, PhD candidate, and a pioneer when it comes to agricultural communication with the social media pages aimed at educating consumers on everything agricultural and sustainability. Welcome to the farm.
Thank you, and it's quite a mouthful that you have there, but I appreciate the thorough introduction. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and as you said, one of the most exciting topics, and I'm glad you called it critical, is sustainability. So I really look forward to jumping in.
Okay, so tell me quickly, how far are we away from really understanding what sustainability really is?
How long is a piece of string?
Okay.
And I mean that's actually a good metaphor in this case, because sustainability isn't a one-dimensional thing. It's not just carbon footprint or environment. It's all just this big web of interconnected vines. And let's say you pull on the nutrition string, you want to amplify the nutritional quality of something. Then you pull on cost on the other end, or on environmental footprint, and vice versa. You can't just focus on one single metric. And so I think we're still just discovering how many things are interconnected and how can we measure them in a way that allows scientists to replicate things, for the producers to implement things in such a way that it causes the smallest ripple effect in all areas of sustainability. So the answer is, I think, still very far, because we've only just started implementing this holistic view of sustainability a few years ago. Before that, it was just carbon footprint or just cost. Now that we're looking at everything holistically, it just opened up a can of worms, and we're making a lot of good progress, but I personally feel just starting, and we have a long way to go. Hats off to the scientists that are busy with it. It's a lot of work, but I still think there's a lot to be done, although we're getting closer, so I'm happy about that.
Okay, very interesting. So in this series, we've got something called robusting.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So here today now, 3 myths, if you want to bust them, especially in the role of livestock industry. Let's bust them. What have you got?
Well, there's so many, and a lot of sensitive subjects. I think one of the greatest myths that's only been recently uncovered actually is the health implications of eating red meat. And what we see in the media is not necessarily what the science says. And what the science says is that your relative risk in terms of getting a disease or something or the other from consuming red meat, the relative risk is like 25%, and that's relative risk. In other words, not absolute risk, just relative risk. So it's already a very small percentage, but if you properly account for the dietary factors, the rest of the health and lifestyle, whether you eat with junk food, whether you exercise or smoke, that falls away. Okay. So there's no risk in eating red meat in terms of, well, let's say cardiovascular disease or early mortality or things like that. So that's the one. It's just the misunderstanding of red meat and its health effects. The other one is the methane cycle. Very few people understand that methane is a very natural component of a grazing animal. So the methane that they emit, they cycle back in a couple of years via the whole carbon cycle, and they eat the plants, that gets released as methane, it gets broken down again, and that cycle sort of completes itself at the end of the day, where methane has a degradation lifetime of 12 years. So in 12 years, that's irrelevant. And if the herds were to remain as they are, it becomes a completely balanced cycle. So of course we need to pay attention to putting carbon back in the soil once we increase the herd size, but that's just a whole thing. Is they're not just the sole emitters of methane and it's just global warming everywhere. They actually put a lot of that back into the soil and complete the cycle. Methane gets degraded. So that's something that's still very poorly understood still. Another one is how essential grazing livestock are in the global food system, because they can convert inedible biomass into something nutritious that gives us protein. So look at the Karoo. You can't crop there. It's dry, nothing grows. No animals actually function there, but send sheep in and they can produce protein, a nutritional source of food from little shrubs and nothingness growing from a bit of dewdrops.
Awesome.
And that's just fantastic, the role that they play in sustainable food systems in that sense.
Okay, I'm glad I have you on the show because this was very educational. So, Enrike, let's talk sustainability in South Africa. How is that relevant?
Wow. Well, I'm glad that you asked South Africa, because that is just that, is sustainability in every single country, in every single production system will look different to another. And that's where South Africa is so unique. We have 9+ different biomes, 14 different ecoregions if you divide it up that way. So literally 14 different places that you will implement a farming system in a different way, because the adaptability of the breeds differ, the rainfall, the climate, the landscape, the type of crops that you can plant to feed your animals, whether you can do it extensively or intensively. So in that sense, what's really important about understanding sustainability is understanding that you can only implement sustainability systems if it's localized and contextualized. We can't implement whatever EU regulations or whatever is in South America, just come in and do it here because it sort of seems sensible, because the goals are different, the production goals are different, the economic goals are different. I mean, we have a very unique socioeconomic situation in South Africa. We have completely different consumer groups. So on the one hand, yes, we want to be environmentally sustainable, which is fantastic, and we want that. But unfortunately, as I mentioned the strings earlier, sometimes when you do things more environmentally friendly, the initial investment is higher. Not always, but the initial investment might be higher, and the farmers aren't always capable of absorbing that. So it ends up at the consumer having to pay more for whatever. I won't label specifics now. And some consumers are willing and able to invest in that. But on the other hand, we have a lot of consumers that are literally just wanting to feed their family. They have 50 Rand in their hand and they want to get the most nutritious meal with that. And we need to understand that we need to cater to both and all people in South Africa, because at the end of the day, we are feeding people. So that makes it so unique, both in the research that we are doing in South Africa, because we are representative of many other countries due to the diversity in biomes. So the sustainability that we research in South Africa, we can apply in the rest of the world, which is fantastic, but which makes us so unique in how we apply the science. So I can't give you one answer in terms of what we should do in sustainability, how we should farm, because every scenario will look differently.
Being a researcher, what is your greatest challenge in your research for, in the topic of sustainability?
I would probably say data availability. Firstly, because of the length of the data, you need, especially when you look at, let's say, carbon cycling type of trials, you only start to see an effect when you change your grazing system from conventional to regenerative or agroecological. You only start to really see differences that you can implement in your thesis and things like that after 5 years. Yes, there are multiple changes in the first 5 years, but in terms of penetrating the soil layer, you only start to get your measurements after 5 years. For some of these trials, you need 20 years of data. So if you want to do this in your lifetime, then you are really dependent on the data availability of farmers. And unfortunately, farmers are struggling with so much on a daily basis that sometimes doing proper record keeping or doing inventory on, let's say, their soil microbes is not top priority. So it's really difficult to get all the data that you need to perform this. And sometimes the farmers are also scared to share their data. They might have it, but it's a question of what's going to happen with my data. What about IP? Who's going to steal my business plan? Because everybody's so fighting for their own survival that yes, that's sometimes a challenge, and I completely respect that challenge. But for researchers, it kind of makes it difficult sometimes to get what we need in order to help them farm more sustainably.
Yeah, like you say, it takes so long, to gather that data, so you don't just want to give it to anybody.
Exactly.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, so we've reached the end of our chat. You brought a mystery cut today.
I did.
What did you bring?
Well, speaking of South Africa, the South African red meat industry, and a specific type of animal that can utilize nothingness and turn it into meat, I brought you some sheep, and not just any cut, sheep riblets, because I'm really excited to see what you're going to do with that.
Oh, awesome. Okay. All right, that's going to be lekker. They're just a bit tougher than the beef and the pork, but I've got something for us. All right, so this lamb riblet being a tougher cut, I put it in the old trusty pressure cooker. That's step one. Bit of stock, 12 minutes high pressure, just to get it nice and soft. So once it comes out, I'm going to give it South African flavors. We're doing a bovril, honey, marinade. So I'm just going to get that sauce on there, get it into the griddle pan, fry it up, grill it up, and then we just have like a little dip, like a sweet soy sauce on, and just dip it in and go for it. So that's what we're doing.
That sounds like a recipe I can take home. Bit of this.
A little bit of sesame seeds. Thank you for visiting us today. And also thank you for working so tirelessly behind the scenes so we can do what we love, farming.
Well, it's a pleasure, but I must say you are the ones who do it behind the scenes, and I'm honored to give you farmers a voice. And thank you for feeding me. This is delicious. I'm going to ask for a doggy bag.
Cheers.